What's done is done, and we have the fastest lap and the fastest race in F1 history. Let's talk about the Italian Grand Prix. And we'll start off with the win. We'll start off with Max Verstappen, who got the fastest qualifying lap in F1 history, the fastest single lap in F1 history, beating the 2020 record, if I'm correct, from the Mercedes all-dominant W11, and then ended up beating the race record, which was from 2003, and yeah, did so with not entirely dominant because mistakes and Norris getting through, but one of the more dominant performances we've seen in F1 this season. To be honest, I'm not too surprised. In my pre-race prediction, I said this was potentially going to be a good one for Verstappen, and I used Silverstone and Spa as two examples of it. Doesn't need much in the way of downforce, so there we go. And he even downplayed his accomplishments there. Even though he is now the, I think, most successful Red Bull driver in the history of the team by pretty much every metric that it can be, he still went, well, the track was resurfaced. Well, the Rettifilio is different. Well, the curbs are different. He also did jokingly say, if you put me in the W11, I'd be faster. But, yeah, it's just Verstappen talking in the way that he talks, right? I do want to say that this was not that surprising, but I also don't want to say it in a way that would downplay the significance of the performance that he's had there. Because it was in part because Red Bull was able to do the ultra-low downforce setup that they were able to benefit. The Monza-Spec car is probably the best Monza-Spec car. Like I said, we saw it at Spa and at Silverstone. But it's only going to be at a couple of tracks that we see something like that. We might see it just in Mexico, but I can't really think of many other places we'll possibly see it for the rest of the season. Because even for Baku and Vegas, there are still some bits of it where the Red Bull's going to struggle a bit more. But, like I said, it's not downplaying how impressive that run is from Max Verstappen. It's not downplaying that win. But I did want to talk about it before we talk about the other parts of the race. So on that note, let's briefly talk McLaren, shall we? Lando Norris ends up in second from Oscar Piastri in third. McLaren did something interesting with the team orders here. That was that, well, they were going to say, alright, we're going to make these calls so that Lando comes back out of the pit window in front of Oscar. And then the pit stop went wrong. Oscar obliged to hand the place back to Lando, but he did complain. And to be honest, I think it's fair. You can just have bad luck. You can just continue to have bad luck. And it would have been 2 races in a row in which Norris had lost a total of 28 points. Potentially a, net of even more. Though more likely it was going to be a net of, 21, 24 points. Depending on how you look at it. Just through things that he couldn't control. But that is motor racing. That is what happens when you go motor racing. I was probably in the kind of camp of the Verstappen radio message. We're like, they're doing that for the championship? And I do see it. I do. I think props to both of the drivers for maintaining their composure. Lando was like, hey, can I get the pace back? And Piastri let himself be known. Not quite in Leclerc in Hungary, really, but he let himself be known. And then obliged. I think that's how you do it. And I think that's how you have to do it when you've got a title battle on your hands like this. And from there, let's just talk about the rest of them. Firstly, bad luck for Hulkenberg with a gearbox issue. They said something to do with hydraulics, didn't they? When they were interviewing Jonathan Wheatley, that put him out of the race. And bad luck for Fernando Alonso, who had a suspension failure come out of Ascari, which also put him out of the race. Both of them could have had good potential. Lance Stroll finishing last was a bit surprising because, Alonso was running quite consistently within the top 10. And for Hülkenberg, Gabriel Bortoleto ended up in the top 10. He had a good run throughout the race, but was always going to lose out a little bit because there were some drivers who were starting a bit further back who possibly deserved to be a bit higher up. Such as Lewis Hamilton, who came up from 10th after his grid penalty for speeding on the reconnaissance laps for Zandvoort. Yeah, he came up from 10th to 6th. He was 5 seconds behind George Russell at the end of it. And Russell stayed close to Leclerc in the early phase, but dropped off as the race went on. It's good for the Tifosi, 4th and 6th. And the same for Alex Albon, qualified 14th, on a day that didn't really go well for his teammate, after being tapped into a spin by Ollie Behrman, which you could argue was what cost him a points finish. Sainz got 11. But I believe they're level in the qualifying head-to-head battle this year. Bortoleto in 8th, like I said, was great form. Antonelli in 9th, but ends up losing a place, right? For a penalty because of how he forced Albon off, supposedly. It was for erratic driving, I think, wasn't it? That was the official reason. Yeah, Hadjar in 10th. Tsunoda got into Q3, finishes 13th. He had a little bit of a tussle with Liam Lawson. But it's another weekend where Hadjar, who went from first podium to back of the grid, started in the pit lane, gets a top 10. More and more and more, we're getting the case that Hadjar needs to be in the top car soon. Elsewhere, the drivers have finished a lap down. Ocon, who was relatively quiet this race, to be honest. I mean, there was one moment, wasn't there? And then Gasly Colapinto. Gasly, who's just signed an extension for Alpine for the next 3 years, right? But let's talk standings, because it is looking more than likely that McLaren will clinch the Constructors' Championship in Baku. The reason being is they have that much of an advantage over Ferrari. I think Ferrari would need to make inroads of a dozen or 2 dozen points on McLaren in Baku alone to be able to keep the championship going to Singapore. But it would be interesting. It would be the first time that the championship has been claimed in Baku. It would also be for Singapore to the same extent if the championship went to there. But Ferrari's good weekend has put them further clear of Mercedes. They're on 280 to Mercedes 260, which is great for a recovery drive. Meanwhile, Red Bull are on 239. They are 21 behind Mercedes. They are 41 behind Ferrari. And with Verstappen having been responsible for most of those points, that's also something that is good for him. As well, let's talk about the Drivers' Championship as well for a few moments, shall we? The gap is now down to 31 points after this weekend. But it could easily do something like that. If Verstappen won every race for the rest of the season, I mean, he wouldn't really be able to catch up, but yeah, if you had that with the McLaren second and third, if we had that finishing order, it would be Piastri's title. So that's what Piastri needs to hope for, right? If he's following Lando home, he needs to hope that someone else is winning. It'll be interesting to see how it unfolds over those final few races. We'll jump back to the manufacturers again in a moment, but behind them, Russell's on 194. He is now also 31 points clear of the next person, which is Charles Leclerc. Hamilton's on 117. He's very much on his own because he is, 46 points behind his teammate and 47 points clear of the car behind, which is Alex Albon, who has now cleared Kimi Antonelli because of the 7th place to Antonelli's 9th here at Monza. Hadjar rounds out the top 10 because at one point puts him clear of Hülkenberg after Hülkenberg's non-start. And then Stroll holds on ahead of Alonso thanks to Fernando's non-finish. if Fernando did finish, he would possibly, quite possibly, be up with Hajar and Hulkenberg. And yeah, let's jump back down, shall we, and talk about the rest for the manufacturers. Because Williams are now 24 points clear of Aston Martin, who are only 1 point clear now of Racing Bulls. That said, with Sauber's points to Bortoletti, they're closing up as well, 6 points the gap there, whilst non-scores for Haas and Alpine puts them further adrift of that battle for 8th. Either way, folks, those are my thoughts, feelings, and observations. As always, thank you so much for watching and joining, and until next time, it's bye-bye for now.